Hey y'all, welcome to my Kamisato Ayato guide as of Genshin Impact 4.2. Mr. Boba Man is an on-field Hydro enabler that's good for setting up reactions and doing his own damage. Before I get into anything else, let's deal with the elephant in the room. Yes, Ayato can be very similar to Child. Is he the exact same? No. Ayato is Tartaglia with a more comfier playstyle. Think of Child as the character that is harder to play, but you get more potential damage and faster Hydro application within a smaller space. Whereas with Ayato, he's very easy to pick up and play, and you don't have to be as concerned about his cooldowns and whatnot. Ayato also has a wider but slower coverage with his Hydro application. Both of them are good in different scenarios, as I'll explain in the team section and showcase. Either way, in this guide, I'll be covering everything you need to know about Ayato, so let's get into it. As usual, let's start with his talents. Ayato's normal attack talent is useless. Yes, his playstyle mainly revolves around normal attacks, but his elemental skill is where the damage is actually coming from. So let's talk about that. Ayato's elemental skill, Kamisato Art Kyoka, is the bulk of his gameplay. On cast, Ayato dashes directionally if he's moving, or backwards if you're not holding a direction, leaving a clone that will deal Hydro damage to enemies in its radius after 6 seconds, or if enemies are nearby. Afterwards, Ayato will be put into the Takemegure Kanka state. The TK state converts his normal attacks to rapid slashes called Shinsuiken that deal Hydro damage that scale off his attack. This set of normal attacks have separate scaling from the ones in his normal attack talent, which only do physical damage. During this, Ayato gains some interruption resistance to help out with maximizing his damage. After a Shinsuiken hits an enemy, it will grant Ayato 1 stack of Namisen, up to 4 times. What that does is boost the damage of each Shinsuiken by a percentage of Ayato's max HP. You can see how many Namisen stacks Ayato has by the symbol floating to his right. This part is pretty inconsequential as you need a lot of HP to see major benefits from it, but hey, free damage. The TK state lasts for 6 seconds with a 12-second cooldown. The Shinsuiken slashes have a really big AoE and don't completely rely on crowd control to hit enemies. At base, with no speed buffs, Ayato can get in a maximum of 15 slashes before the TK state ends. Note for this is that you don't need to spam normal attack for the slashes to come out. Just holding it will make him do it automatically with the same result. Let's move on to his burst. Ayato's elemental burst, Kamisato Art Suiyu, is great at doing damage and applying Hydro. On cast, Ayato summons a field that will constantly deal AoE Hydro damage to the enemies in it. As a bonus, it gives a normal attack damage bonus to the characters standing in it. This field is about as big as Ganyu Celestial Shower, to give a point of reference. The water droplets do AoE damage, meaning that if enemies are close enough, one droplet can do damage to multiple enemies, which is known as quadratic scaling. Basically, to sum it up, this means that Ayato's burst does more damage with the more enemies you fight at once. His burst has an 18-second duration with a 20-second cooldown. It does cost 80 energy, so this burst is realistically used once every other rotation, but with a longer uptime, that turns out to be completely fine for Ayato. You can choose to run a more burst support Ayato if this Hydro field is all you care about. Ayato's A1 passive gives his elemental skill some quality of life changes. On the skill cast, Ayato will get 2 Namisen stacks immediately, so you get that HP scaling damage buff faster. Also, when his illusion explodes, Ayato will max out his Namisen stacks, so you can have his full damage from the very beginning of his skill's duration. Nice quality of life that you don't have to think about. Ayato's A4 passive regenerates 2 energy for himself for every second that he's off field, up to 40, which is half of his energy cost for his burst. This is a very basic buff, but a really good one since it lowers his energy requirement. Now that you know what Ayato does, which talents should you level first? For his talent priority, level up his elemental skill first since the main source of his damage comes from his Shinsuiken slashes. Lastly, level up his burst second for the water droplet damage and normal attack damage bonus. His normal attack talent is completely irrelevant at all levels of investment, so you can leave that at level 1 to save resources. Now that you've got a better understanding on how Ayato works, let's get into how you can build him to be amazing, starting with the artifacts. Ayato has a lot of options when it comes to artifact sets, so I would recommend picking between these based on other characters you want to build at the same time as him. His uncontested best set is the 4-piece set of Nymph's Dream. Gives a 15% Hydro damage bonus on the 2 set and more Hydro damage along with attack percent in the 4-piece effect. The requirements to activate the 4-piece set, that being normal attacks, elemental skill, and burst, are all things you want to be doing with Ayato anyways, thus making this his premier set. Only downside is that it's paired with Vorikasha's Glow, which might not make it the most resonant an efficient set to farm for. Next are the old hodgepodge of sets that all perform similarly to one another. 4-piece Heart of Depth, 4-piece Gladiator's Finale, and 4-piece Echoes of an Offering. All of them are great and give different bonuses that all end up performing about the same. The 4-piece set of Heart of Depth performs better with higher attack and less damage percent, while the 4-piece set of Gladiators does the reverse, better with damage buffs, less with more attack. Things to note with the 4-piece set of Echoes of an Offering are that 1, the domain this set is in is extremely inefficient to farm unless you're also building Shao, and 2, this set is oddly ping dependent, since it works by re-rolling a random number for every attack you do. If you're regularly playing with more than 100 ping, I would suggest some of the other sets I mentioned earlier. Thirdly is the 4-piece set of Marushosei Hunter. This is only a good option when you have a reliable way to lose or gain HP, with either Farina or a healer, but it gives a normal and charge attack bonus and up to 36% crit rate whenever your current HP changes. Lastly, any mix of attack percent or hydro damage bonus sets will also do really well on Ayato if the substats on your pieces are significantly better than if you were trying to force 4-piece set bonuses. You can also use a 2-piece of an energy recharge set if you just want to mainly use his burst for widespread hydro application. Alright, artifact sets, check. But what about the stats? As a note, Ayato ascends on crit damage, so he gets a free 88.4% by the time he's ascended to 90. But let's go through the main stats. On his sands, Ayato will prefer attack percent or ER. Attack percent is more preferable, but if you need the extra ER to meet his requirement, then go for that. Speaking of, Ayato's energy recharge requirement can depend on how you want to use him. In saying that, it is generally pretty high. With a 1 skill rotation as the sole hydro character, Ayato wants around 200% or more recharge, around 140 to 150% if you're using another hydro character with him. If your team setup allows for 2 skill casts in the rotation, Ayato would want around 130 to 170% recharge depending on what batteries you're using with him. Time for the obligatory. Of course, this will be different for every account, but find the range that works best for you. For his goblet, hydro damage bonus will be the best main stat because, well, he does hydro damage. Lastly, for his circlet, Ayato wants crit percent, whichever one you need more of. In terms of substat focus, it generally follows what I mentioned before. You want enough ER to be able to burst almost every rotation, followed by crit percent, attack percent, and any spirit HP percent rolls are also fine because of his Namizen bonus. Alright, you've got his artifacts. So what about his weapon? Ayato has got a decent assortment of weapons that are good for him, so let's go through them starting from the free options moving up. First is the Harbinger of Dawn. Nice simple crit stick on both ends, as long as you can keep Ayato at 90% or more HP. Next is the Amenoma Kageuchi, the Inazuma craftable sword. While the passive isn't used for the first rotation since Ayato often wants to use his burst before his skill, it can work for reducing his energy requirement for the second rotation onwards with the flat energy it refunds. Third is the Kago Tsurube Ishin. You can get this weapon from Kazua's story quest. It's a decent option for Ayato to use, dealing an instance of physical damage on normal, charged, or plunging attack, as well as giving a small attack buff that can carry into his burst. Moving on to the gacha and paid options. First of this category is the Lion's Roar. A good amount of base attack and more through its attack percent secondary stat. This weapon is especially good in electrocharge teams, but works well enough in other situations. The last weapon I'll recommend in the 4-star category is from the Battle Pass, the Black Sword. The Black Sword is one of Ayato's best options, offering crit rate, normal and charged attack damage bonus with a bit of healing based on the wielder's attack on hit every 5 seconds. Great weapon for him overall. Let's go over Ayato's best 5-star options to cap off the weapons. Scoured Blade can be used as a way to fill his energy requirements, but not much else aside from that. Summer Shaper is a nice big attack stick, but since Ayato doesn't need a shielder most of the time, you can't max out his passive. Good for the secondary stat regardless. Then, Ayato can use most of the 5-star crit swords. Mist Splitter Reforged, Primordial Jade Cutter, Splendor of Tranquil Waters are all great options for Ayato, even just as stat sticks. Ayato doesn't take full advantage of the Mist Splitter Reforged or the Splendor due to them having requirements to activate their passives that Ayato can't consistently fulfill, but they're still great overall. Last but not least is Ayato's signature and best, the Haran Gappaku Futsu. Gives a huge crit rate boost on the secondary stat, all elemental damage bonus on the passive, and normal attack damage bonus on the effect. Basically a black sword on crack. Use it if you have it, but it is less universal than Mist Splitter or Jade Cutter, so if you wanted a weapon for its value on other characters, I would suggest trying for one of those instead. And those are good weapons for Ayato. He does have fewer options than most other characters due to how he is mostly focused on normal attacks, but also a rather accessible one in the Black Sword. With the build out of the way, let's move on to his Constellations and see if they're worth pulling for. Ayato's Constellations offer nice upgrades that improve on his damage, but they are by no means necessary. Ayato C1 gives his Shun Suiken slashes a 40% damage bonus when attacking enemies with 50% or less of their HP. It's an alright buff, but a little inconsistent in how beneficial it is due to the restriction. C2 is the best stopping point in terms of early Constellations. Ayato's maximum number of Nami-san stacks he can have is now 5, and when you have 3 or more of them, Ayato's max HP will be increased by 50%. This is a pretty good constellation that basically boosts his damage and makes it so his Nami-san stacks can contribute more to his total output. C3 and 5 boosts his skill and burst talent levels respectively, with the former being another good constellation with it not only boosting the attack scaling part of his skill, but also the HP scaling for Nami-san stacks. Ayato C4 gives nearby characters a 15% normal attack speed buff for 15 seconds after you cast his burst. Basically a free 2 or 3 more Shun Suiken slashes for Ayato per rotation. This makes him and any other characters that primarily use their normal attacks do more damage. Ayato C6 is a pretty simple but strong constellation for front-loading his damage. After using his skill, Ayato will gain a buff that will cause his first Shun Suiken to have 2 more slashes alongside it that each do damage based on 450% of Ayato's attack stat. It is only once per skill cast, but a very big damage upgrade overall. To wrap up on Ayato's constellations, there are decent upgrades that scale off the last, all resulting in more of his personal damage. He is already a complete character at C0, but should you want to invest in his constellations, suggested stopping points are at C2 and of course C6. We've gone through both how to build Ayato and what you can get out of his constellations, but what teams can you actually use him in? Ayato can excel in a variety of teams due to being Hydro, so let's go over them. Hyper Bloom or Virgin will be Ayato's best team archetype due to being really inexpensive to operate. Slot in a Dendro character with a Hydro or double Dendro. After that, slot in the respective element depending on the reaction that you want to use. Electro for Hyper Bloom or Pyro for Virgin. Good candidates for the Dendro slot are Nahida, Yaoyao, Kole, Baju, or Dendro Traveler. If you want to use another Hydro slot, good ones to pick are Xingqiu or Yelan. For your Electro and Pyro slots, they primarily want to be built on a lot of EM. The best picks for Hyper Bloom are Kuki Shinobu for her periodic electro application and healing, and Raiden for the basically infinite range of her electro application. For Burjin, your best choice is Toma. You can also choose to run Burjin differently with the Kazuha and Bennett combo, where you use Kazuha's burst to swirl Bennett's inspiration field, but that pretty much narrows your Dendro applicator down to Nahida because otherwise you'd be activating Burning instead. But if you want to do that, that works too. Ayato can also be played in Electrocharged, or otherwise known as Taser, but Electrocharged as a reaction itself doesn't do a whole lot of damage and is more so reliant on the party's raw damage to make up for it. That being said, Taser almost always involves the combination of Fischl and Beto to deal reasonable damage, and from there you can slot in a healer or buffer. Shinobu can work here as the third electro applicator and healer. Bennett also works as a healer but gives a flat attack buff along with it, which is especially helpful since the rest of the party also scales on it. Or, instead of having some form of sustain, you can go all out with your damage with an animal character to swirl both elements and abuse the 4-piece set of Viridescent's resistance shred. Good characters for that are Kazuha, Sucrose, and Venti. You can choose to mix the best of both worlds and get both the Res Shred and healing with Jean or Sayu as well. Next up, pretty simple. Reverse Vaporize. Ayato won't be as effective as Child for this archetype, but still good nonetheless. Bennett and Shangling are your premier teammates for this team. For the last slot, you can choose to run an animal character for the VV effect, Zhongli for protection, or another Hydro character to make sure the element sticks so that Shangling can keep triggering Vaporize. Freeze is another good archetype for Ayato to fit in, where he'll mainly want to use his burst to apply Hydro. Slot in 2 cryo characters and an anima to group up enemies. For the animal slot, Venti and Kazuha are the ones I would suggest. Sucrose not as much because EM buffs have nothing to do with freeze. Ayato can be used in Nilo Bloom teams, and can be pretty good at it due to his widespread Hydro application. If you were to use him in this team, you'd want to purely focus on EM and ER for his build to maximize on his burst uptime as well as Bloom damage. Slot in 2 Dendro characters afterwards, like the ones I mentioned earlier, and you're good to go. The last team archetype I want to cover in this video is Hyper Carry, where Ayato's personal damage shines above all else. Great supports to go along with this are Bennett for his huge attack buff and healing, or Yunjin for her normal attack buff for his Shun Suiken, as well as an attack speed buff if you have her at C6. Kazuha can be used here to group enemies and his elemental damage bonus effect, Zhongli as the best shielder to prevent Ayato from being interrupted, and or another off-field Hydro support like Xingqiu, Yelan, or Farina. Hearing about how Ayato works is nice, I'm sure, but let's put that into practice. Time for a showcase. For this showcase, I'll be using Ayato at level 90 with holding a level 90 black sword at refinement rank 3, levels 9 and 9 for both his skill and burst, C0 with 4-piece gladiator's finale. Here is the build. Let's get into the showcase. Roll the clips. Let's wrap up this video. Ayato is a really good Hydro applicator that, though not on the level of Child's Speed, has its own strength in it in having a wider AoE and Ayato himself being more comfortable to play. For more details, check out the KeqingMains Guides linked in the description below. Leave a like if you found this guide helpful. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back for another video. See ya.